of freedom pass from hand to yearning hand, and the vision of our fathers spread hope throughout this land, as the dreams some fought and died for in my heart becomes my own. I will strive to keep her promise, America, my home. America, America, may God bless America, and freedom reign across America, my home. From the shorelines to the prairies, to the cities great and small, we have reaped the fruits of justice and liberty for all. So with deep appreciation for the blessings of freedom that we know in this great and wonderful land of ours, I'm Dr. George Simon, welcoming you to another edition of Character Matters. This is the program where we talk about what I consider to be the defining issue of our time, the character crisis that we face, and that I write about and I blog about at my blog at manipulative-people.com. I write about in my books, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, my book Character Disturbance, The Phenomenon of Our Age, and also The Judas Syndrome for those of you of the Christian faith community. And tonight we have a special program. We will have you join the conversation if you wish. If you have any questions, toward the end of the program, I have an interview scheduled for today that will run about 50 minutes or so, which you should enjoy. It features one of the other broadcasters here on the UCY.TV network. A conversation I had with Michael Cross about his books, which are on a very interesting topic that I've spoken about before, that being psychopathy. So the number to call if you have questions toward the end of the program will be 718-717-8296. That's 717-8296, area code 718. And I'll give that number out again once the interview is finished. But as I said, today's program is going to be a little different. In just a few moments, we'll begin the interview with Michael Cross, and I'm sure that you will find it of real interest. The topic is one that I've written about many times on my manipulative-people.com blog, and one that I have written about extensively in my books, In Sheep's Clothing and Character Disturbance. So right now we're gonna cue in the interview here. The quality may not be quite up to snuff, but I think you'll enjoy it. And so, without any further ado, we'll go to the interview.
My guest tonight is Michael Cross. Michael is a featured broadcaster here on the UCY.TV network. As a matter of fact, it was primarily because of a suggestion of the producer after I guested myself on Michael's program that I even got a program of my own on UCY.TV. So I want to welcome Michael to the program. Michael, first tell us a little bit about your program.
Okay. Well, my program's over. It's, again, like you said, it's on UCY TV, and it's called Unlock the Door Radio. And we deal with a variety of issues, but usually they're dealing with everything from psychopathy to other psychological conditions and how they affect society as well as society itself and the hold the media has on people's minds. If they want to see some of the previous shows that I've done, they can go to my YouTube station at Michael Cross. That's one. It states Freedom from Conscience because that's my book series. And also they can check some of my writings over at michaelcross.net.
Michael, I'm going to ask you to repeat, if you don't mind, the very first bit of information, because we had an internet little squibble there, and the first part of what you said was a little garbled. So if you could say that one more time, I'm sure the folks listening would appreciate it.
Yeah, I was just mentioning that my show, Unlock the Door Radio, is one that deals with mostly how psychology, politics, and society in general come together and gives people kind of an explanation as to why their elected representatives or why the media or so forth act the way that they do.
And where can people go to access your material?
They can find recordings of most of my shows at michaelcross.net, and that's the one that will also state when you type in to the search at YouTube, it would say Freedom from Conscience, which is the book series that I have, and also they can see stuff that's dealing in a written form at my website at michaelcross.net.
Great. Thank you so much for repeating that information. I'm sure the audience will like to have that. And by the way, that title of your series, Freedom from Conscience, I love that. Not because I like the kinds of people who display that kind of behavior, but because your title reflects a dimension of this whole problem that I think hasn't gotten very much attention. And so I hope that in our discussion today you can tell us a little bit about how you came by that title and what that dimension of psychopathy means for you.
Oh, absolutely. I'll go into as much detail as you wish.
Okay. So tell us about you've got this new series and a new book. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's part of the same series, Freedom from Conscience. This one here will be the fourth in the series. I'm hoping that the publisher will go for all six. And the fourth one is called Freedom from Conscience, Descent into Darkness. And they all follow the same character, a young woman who starts out in the first book as a high school student, and she realizes she's a little different. And the difference, of course, is that she displays a lot of psychopathic tendencies. And so what I chose to do
I'm going to interrupt you for just a second, Michael. You make an important point right off the bat, and that is that she knew. You say that this character, she knew she was different.
Mm-hmm.
So,
which leads her to be somewhat of an outsider. Now, the thing is, I create the character to let people see exactly what goes on in a psychopathic person's mind, and it's a first-person narrative, well, similar to movies you've seen, let's say Clockwork Orange, in which you follow in the main character's eyes and also his voice is narrating it, the Alex character.
Yes.
And she's kind of, now, before people think she's the villain, she's actually more of she's an anti-hero. And again, if I'm going to use a movie analogy, it'd be very similar to the old Clint Eastwood movies, where he rides into town, and he doesn't have any really particular affection protection for the people in the town, but he has this kind of sense that if something happens, that he's going to fix it. But again, it's more of this violates the way I see the world, and so therefore I will get revenge. And again, another movie series would be very similar to, what was those Charles Bronson movies?
Death Wish.
Yeah, Death Wish, in which the character is a policeman. He goes out and he's like a vigilante serial killer. Of course, in those days, they just called him a vigilante. The serial killers were not a big part of the vocabulary back in the 1970s, even though they did have them. And so the character eventually, she runs into some people who share certain characteristics with her, and then starts trying to, rid the world of evil in the way that she sees it. And of course that leads to a lot of problems, of course, and a lot of dynamics between the various characters, of which I carry some of the characters through all the book series. And by the time you get to the fourth book, you find the character, she has a family, although it's a very non-traditional family. I'm not going to give any hints at what that means. And she's also entered Oregon politics. It's set in the state of Oregon, and she's already been elected as a state legislator, and she's getting a lot of push to run for Congress. And then some things happen in which she gets in, she kind of tangles with some wrong people in the underworld who are involved in the sex trade industry. And then that leads to the plot, of which, it's kind of her versus them. Her is more the predator after other predators. And I won't say how it ends or anything, but I think it's pretty exciting. The publisher really liked it when he read it, so we'll see how it goes.
So I take it that this predator against predator motif is kind of analogous to the storyline in Dexter, the popular Showtime series from a while back. Is that kind of like that?
You cut out, but were you mentioning Dexter?
Yes.
I had started actually writing. I had the rough draft done before I even heard of Dexter, but there's a big difference between her character and the Dexter. I personally, from people I've talked to who are, some of them classified, actually diagnosed as psychopaths, research I've done, just on my own and everything, I really don't believe Dexter is a psychopath. I think he is psychotic and probably suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, but he seems to be more Asperger, because a psychopath would display a lot more pro-social, and I don't mean that in the pro-society, getting along with people, but psychopaths seem to be very charismatic, and they also are very manipulative to get things they want. Dexter was sort of like obsessed with his little blood fetish, you could say, and he's very happy in his little corner and, not really interacting with people in his department. Yeah. So he seemed to me to be more of suffering from some sort of Asperger, and then later you find out that he's, suffered a really horrendous loss of his mind.
Yeah, I did a series of articles on one of the blogs that I write for about just how accurately the character was portrayed as a psychopath, and really he's kind of an amalgamation of a lot of different things, and so some of the characteristics they gave him were not at all that accurate, but he made for an interesting character.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there was times in the series, I don't want to talk too much about, Dexter, but there was times in the series where he, and I will note too, so the one things I didn't copy, I will note that I started watching the series after the first book was actually already in the process of getting edited and published.
So you had this idea early on, even before it became kind of rogue, and what gave you What prompted you to compose such a series?
Well, it was actually interesting. It was kind of ironic because I have this kind of, I don't know, kind of dark sense of humor in which people would ask me, because I also do a lot of stuff where you do projects around the world, with select students. And a lot of those involve going to done some work in Tibet and China and Venezuela, those kinds of places. And I'd get people ask, well, what do you guys do down there? And I just started getting this kind of joke and, having the people I was with play along. And, oh, yeah, we go down there and, we go out and go on murder sprees, stuff like that, just for fun, just to see how people would react and everything when the other people played along. And then someone, that I was doing this joke on actually said, you should write a book about that. That would be fantastic. And I was like, yeah, it would be, wouldn't it? So I write the book in which the first book deals with the person that recruits the main character into serial killing is her teacher. And then it, just goes from there. So, and I thought, with all the academics that surround, because I have a strong interest in politics, obviously politicians don't fit the mode of the guy that sits in the basement and cuts out newspaper articles about, various crimes and so forth that he or she has committed. So, since I had actually studied up on psychopaths, the ones that are really intelligent do wind up making the laws. They are the ones that we elect to Congress, to the presidency, and so forth. It'd be interesting to create a character who embodied every aspect of the psychopathic personality, but then to let people see through her eyes how they would see a situation. Like the first time she actually does commit a murder, most people would be very devastated. She's worried about how this will affect the person that she's interested in. Will they look down upon her? I think maybe you've seen that in Psychopaths.
Yeah, from a purely practical sense. I talk about that in a couple of articles. A very practical regret, not the same as remorse or guilt, but a very practical regret.
Yeah. Well, in her case, she's more interested in, again, not giving away too much of the plot. She's more interested in how she's worried. She's wondering about religion. Is this person's soul that she's just released? Is this person, still cognizant? Are they dead? She's in her mind, she's thinking about philosophy versus the fact that she's just killed someone. And in that sense, most people would be just totally devastated. I've read about soldiers, the first time they ever kill anyone, they're just like a psychological mess, and they never get over it. Whereas a psychopath, they maybe were able to go to work the next day, or go to school, or anything like that, and be thinking about totally different things than what they just did.
Yep. Well, have you studied this topic for a long time?
Yeah, but not like in a clinical setting, just reading up and really just voraciously trying to find things that match and put together. And in my radio show, I've interviewed, I've interviewed 3 people that are diagnosed as psychopaths. And each time it confirms that I have gotten it down the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And also I've interviewed people like, I interviewed the woman who wrote the books, one of them's called Women Who Love Psychopaths.
Yes.
And I interviewed her last week. And, of course, most of the people that come from that perspective are telling me all the devastating things that psychopaths do. But I don't believe that they're like, evil robots necessarily. I think that they just think in such a way that they may seem like robotic individuals. Some alternative media claims that they're reptilian or something like that. And I think that ultimately, again, if you look at character, the best way to relate to something psychologically is to see characters. And the Clint Eastwood character in those spaghetti westerns, James Bond. I mean, I think. How do you feel about it? You think he's like a psychopath?
He's got some qualities. You really raise a point here. One of the points that I make in my book, Character Disturbance, and I've featured in many articles, and I do this training all the time for professionals. One of the main points I make is that we're now coming to realize, just as we did with the autistic spectrum disorders, that character disturbance exists along a spectrum, and there are very few folks who occupy positions at the very extreme end of that spectrum that we would appropriately label as psychopathic, totally devoid of conscience as we know it, and who have the incredible ability to either be devoid of emotion or to compartmentalize emotion when they want to do heinous things. Those folks are at the extreme end of a continuum, but there's a whole continuum there, and in our crazy age, in our age of rampant moral relativism, entitlement, permissiveness, etc., we have a lot of folks who fall somewhere on the spectrum who fall just short of being out-and-out psychopaths, but are still some pretty dangerous and pretty interesting and not healthy characters. So James Bond would probably fall somewhere on the continuum. Would I classify him as an out-and-out psychopath? Probably not.
Okay, but he'd be like, if you're using the hair checklist, then 0 is not at all, 40 is all the way, maybe 25, 30.
Yeah, and by the way, the hair checklist, the PCLR revised edition has proven itself empirically as the instrument of choice. But do you know how much training it takes to be able to score that thing reliably, and how few clinicians even know how to use it appropriately? The literature is very clear that certain scores really do mean something, but the fact is you have to really know what you're doing, and you have to have plenty of confirmatory background information with which to be able to score it. So yes, provided you have enough information about the person's background and providing where they load on the scales, yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the thing is that, where would you say that, let me think here, would you call a person who, let's say they score 20 to 25, and let's say for sake of argument that that's been done in such a way that it's professional. It's not just looking at the list on the internet and then doing the questions.
Right.
Would they be kind of like, without getting it confused with BPD, would that be considered maybe a borderline psychopath?
Yeah, but also depending on how they're loading on the scales. Mm-hmm. The essential factor with psychopathy is what some researchers have called this cold-heartedness. It's the senseless, callous, and remorseless ability to use and abuse others without any compunction. It's a kind of malignant narcissism that has the person believing that because they are innately superior to these human beings who have qualms and have consciences, that they're entitled to prey upon them, much like we would snuff out a spider or an ant that was coming into our house. We'd step on it without a second thought. saying to ourselves, perhaps without much of a second thought, they're not coming into my house, and they're a lower life form, and I deserve my creature comforts. So it's that kind of callous insensitivity to other human beings that is the prime factor in psychopathy. Now, there are other factors that may or may not be present, some of which load on the psychopathy scale, but the big one is that factor. So I would say with qualification, I would want to look at how the person is scoring and whether or not the load is primarily on factor 1, because that's the one that counts.
Okay, could you explain that?
Factor 1, as I said, is that heartlessness, that extraordinary lack of empathy for other human beings. Factor 2 has to do with social parasitism, antisocial behaviors, criminal behaviors. With the psychopath, factor 1 is the essential thing. There are a dime a dozen crooks out there and social parasites who are not psychopaths. The essential feature is that heartlessness. So even though there are other items on the PCL that load on the overall score, if I were wanting to see how borderline a psychopath somebody is, what I want to see is how they're loading on factor 1. Factor 1 is that callous, senseless, remorseless use and abuse of others, rooted in an extraordinary lack of empathy or an incredible ability to compartmentalize emotion. It's the heartlessness. That's the key factor. The social parasitism that can sometimes accompany psychopathy and also loads on the scale is not an essential feature. So there are plenty of dime a dozen crooks out there who are social parasites who are not psychopaths. And how borderline a psychopath is would depend on how strongly they load on factor 1. So I wouldn't want to look just at the score. It would be wrong to say, well, their score comes very close to the cut score, so maybe they're a borderline psychopath. That wouldn't be quite fair enough to say. I would want to see what items and what factor those items are related to, what items are loading on the scale. And if they're factor 1 items, then I'm getting concerned that we're dealing with somebody who's almost a psychopath.
Yeah, because I've actually known people who they'll actually say that they don't feel guilt for anything they've done. They might feel disappointment if they do something and it turns out that it didn't benefit them. Then they feel disappointment, but they don't feel the guilt. They don't feel any kind of moral obligation to feel bad about something. And then they will actually say that while they may feel sympathy for people, they don't feel empathy. They don't even know how to define the word in their mind. These can be actually really intelligent, highly educated people. I know I'm not going to name names of people, so if they're listening, don't worry. But, I'm not going to out you. But I have known a couple people who, they'll in their words and deeds, it seems like that they would fall into that, and they're not parasites. Right. They're actually very hardworking, straight A type students.
Right. And that is the key factor. And by the way, we also know that factor has some loading on other disorders too, especially the autistic spectrum disorders. That factor in and of itself is not a qualifier for psychopathy, but it is the essential factor.
Yeah, I would kind of think in the sense that it may these people I know, they're very charming. And I know people that are Asperger, and They're not.
They're not charming, yes.
No.
Yeah.
They're straightforward. It's kind of like, A, B, C, D. If anything changes in their routine, they go crazy.
Right.
But these people actually love it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're in a car with them and their tire blows out, they're kind of like smiling as they're getting control of the car.
Yeah.
They're not scared.
Yeah.
So
one of my great mentors says what they lack is what we call adaptive fearfulness. In other words, where most of us, appreciating that there's some danger involved, might feel at least a little apprehension, even if we have the courage to overcome it. We feel the apprehension, whereas they don't. They will go and do what most people wouldn't even think of doing, because they have the freedom from that adaptive fearfulness, which is why they engage in so many daredevil type behaviors, and why they actually, as you just said, sometimes relish the opportunity.
Yeah, this person I'm telling you about, and I'll believe what she said. She lost control of her car and spun and hit the other side. That means she barely avoided getting hit by two lanes coming from the other direction. Like from a movie, around in circles.
Right.
And she said that she didn't feel anything when she got out of the car. She was just trying to see what happened to the car, and the policeman who showed up actually commented, "You're not fearful. You seem to be totally calm." And
Yeah, Michael, it was this very realization. You see, all this research on psychopathy and the reinstating of the term, how it came back into usage, and the whole thinking about it, we owe this all to Robert Hare's work in Canada. It had sat pretty much on the shelf for years since Cleckley first talked about it many years ago. And then there was all kinds of misconceptions about it, and even a lot of professionals who poo-pooed the whole notion. And if it wasn't for his groundbreaking work several years ago, and bringing back the research on it and developing the instruments, we wouldn't have any of the information today that we have. But it was primarily this feature that got me to realize the horrible shortcomings of traditional psychology paradigms and how destructive those paradigms were for people who were trying to get help if they were dealing with someone in their life who was at least to some degree like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it reminded me of something that someone told me once, that when they were a kid, because I know that you're not supposed to diagnose kids, but they were talking about when they were a kid, that they were fishing one night with their dad, and I guess it was catfish or something like that, something that just bites and then just goes with it. So you don't have to be holding like you're fishing for trout. And when some fish bit, again, pure darkness, I guess. At least that's what he was saying. That the pole flew up and flew into the river. And without hesitation, this person I was talking to, they were about 12 years old, said that they just dived in. They didn't even think.
Right.
They dove in, went underwater, got the pole, got the fish too, and came out kind of like, okay, well, yeah. I said, well, didn't that scare you? And they were like, I didn't think about it. I blacked out.
Right. And, I make also this point in my books and in my articles and during my training, too. This extraordinary goal-directedness that they have without adaptive fearfulness is something people really need to recognize, because it's not like these folks necessarily have sadistic tendencies where they enjoy hurting people. It's really often not a second thought. If they have a goal in mind and it involves doing something unthinkable, it's the pursuit of the goal that they're after, regardless of the consequence. They don't even think of the consequence. And if somebody gets hurt in the process, so be it. But so often they'll do these kinds of things without the expressed intent to hurt. Now, it's a whole different ball game for folks who are psychopathic and also have sadistic tendencies, that's a whole different ballgame. Fortunately, they're rarer still, but they're out there.
Yeah, that's why the character in my book, the way I present her, is there's a hint of sadistic behavior, but just a hint. But most of the time, it's very just, this is an objective. Kind of like, I guess, if you were a CIA assassin or something. But again, you're not taking orders from anyone. You're just doing it yourself. And then going in and accomplishing whatever goal that you've set. So, yeah, like I said, I play around with it, but I don't make the person seem like they're like, they want to sit there and torture someone and for a few days, or something you might see on Criminal Minds or something like that.
This sounds like such an interesting series. Who is the publisher, Michael?
It's a little publisher out of Texas, so it's, I don't make a lot, but it's Black Rose Publishing.
Uh-huh.
And all 4 books can be found there. They're also on Amazon, but you can go directly to Black Rose Publishing and just type in Freedom from Conscience. So it's, again, what I like to do with the book is the first one is set in high school. A classic outsider, but also someone who's got psychopathic tendencies. The second one's set in college when the gal is actually finishing up her PhD in psychology. And, what happens when she's reintroduced to the lifestyle that she has tried to give up after high school, after a few tragedies. And then the third one deals with actually the irony of the fact that she writes a book that's a text on psychopathy and is doing research, gets captured by an actual serial killer who has no idea who she is, but thinks she's interesting and would like to make her an apprentice. So it gets into a lot of really dark, whereas the second book, everything comes out really nice for her. The third book is really, that's why it's called Descent into Darkness, because what would happen if you had 2 people who are psychopaths, but they're at odds with each other?
Are you going to... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, the idea I came up with was the idea that since there's both a mutual love and hate going on at the same time, because I think they both see something about themselves in the other person, but neither of them are willing to admit it. And the main villain in that book is someone who, because his child was killed by some drug dealer, he's decided that he's going to get revenge on God by going out and being a serial killer.
Are you going to tease us any with this character as far as how long she will continue to be the dominant character? Is she going to partner up with someone eventually? Is she going to turn over the reins to somebody eventually?
Like I said, in the second book, she forms a family relationship that is fairly unique. And if you know anything about psychopathy, you know that psychopaths are not at all caring about social standards, social norms, or anything like that.
Like Charlie Manson and his family.
Yeah, let's leave it a little bit of a hint there. Something like that. Yeah. But in the third book, she's trying to be as normal as possible without being, going out and publicizing or getting a reality show on some TV series or something like that. And then in the fourth book, you start getting new characters in, and that's when I start making it political. You get a new character. I won't mention exactly if he's a good guy or a bad guy, but you get a rogue CIA agent who, you start seeing that he seems to have those same characteristics himself, because he was a retired CIA assassin. But you don't know whether he's part of the good guys or the bad guys until the very end. And that's where it gets more into politics. In the fifth book, if it gets published, I really hope it does. The fifth and sixth book actually deal more on the fun aspect of conspiracy theory, in which you find that she discovers that well, politics is filled with a lot of different societies and so forth that she had no clue of. And then she finds out, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, just a teaser there, it's that she starts finding out something about herself that she did not know about her past and so forth, her history. And then you start finding people that the villains are far darker than the previous ones. And so, yes, there is a partnering up. I won't say whether the main character ever dies or anything, but there's things that happen that are pretty close. So, again, you know, it's classic, what would you call it, journey of the hero. Mm-hmm. But it goes through so many different phases as, you know, because each book ends with a new phase of her life accomplished. But then it opens up a new phase and a new phase. And then, like I said, it gets into stuff when it gets into the politics and some of the secret societies and so forth. I never use the term Illuminati or anything like that. But it's something similar, and it, you know, you see what the dynamic of what would happen if someone who's really resenting the fact that now their freedom has been taken away, how they will react within the confines now of being integrated into something that they never had any dream of ever, you know, this kind of thing existing.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I'd like to redirect the conversation just a little bit here for a bit. But I'd also like to for you to tell the listeners whether or not your books are available in ebook form as well.
Oh yeah, they're all on ebook.
Oh, excellent.
And all those kind of things. You can, if you just type in "freedom from conscience" and then go to my web. Okay, the best thing you can do is go to my website at michaelcross.net, and then all the names of the books. I haven't put the fourth one on there yet because I mean its release date's in a couple weeks, but the fourth one will be there soon. And then you would just Google those, and they're offered through like Amazon and all the other ways of ordering books.
Great. But the area I wanted to steer us into a little discussion of here is, it seems also that you've kind of did some, at least, armchair theorizing about our our socio-cultural milieu and these character disturbances that we've had that appear to be at least somewhere along the continuum gaining in prevalence. And I was just wondering if you had some notions of your own about just what's going on here, where we seem to have, you know, hardly a week goes by where we don't have some kind of headlines made by some character who shoots up a school, or some person in high office is found out to be just exactly the kind of snake that they really are. Or what do you think is responsible for this? At one time, the developer of the term psychopathy and the person who categorized the features of this had called it one of the most rare kinds of conditions that he'd seen. And by the way, he gave it the label psychopathy because he thought it was a form of moral insanity. He thought that basically it was a type of insanity that wasn't like normal insanity where the person can't reason, because these people reason just fine. And they were not delirious, and they were not under the throes of hallucinations or delusions, but their absence of conscience was so profound and seemingly so nonsensical. That's the key. It didn't make any sense that he thought it was a form of what he called moral insanity. And it was quite rare. The thoughts were at that time that, less than 1/200th of the population would fit this category. Well, those estimates have drastically changed, and people along the spectrum have dramatically increased in prevalence. What do you think is responsible for that?
Well, okay, first I'm going to say, when you hear about school shootings and stuff like that, I don't think most of those are psychopaths. It seems that they're all like people that are on some sort of major medications most of the time, treating other sorts of disturbances. And so I'm not sure that would be a factor. I mean, that sort of thing. But when it comes to, let's go back to what you just brought up, the idea that it used to be considered 1/200th or something like that. What I think was a difference, and here's when it comes to psychopaths, because I actually do believe there's a genetic component. I think there is something that, at least from what I have read and so forth, it seems to be a genetic component involved in it. But its expression may be different depending on how the child is raised. And I think back in the 50s, when people did studies, most of the people you'd be doing studies on in the general population, I'm not talking about criminals, but the general population, would be people who kind of like the character that I create. She's a psychopath, but she has an ethical base. She's ambitious. She has kind of a sense of, her own way of doing it, but she's got a certain ethical base, even if it is rooted in a certain arrogance and elitism in her own mind. And I think that anyone who was maybe genetically psychopathic in those days may have been part of more of a traditional culture, and therefore they wouldn't display it in the same way. Maybe they could, like, again, I'm using TV analogies, but like the TV series Mad Men.
Right.
I think that I don't know the name of the guy. My wife watches it all the time. The head character seems to display the characteristics of a psychopath, but he also has a sense of, well, this would be wrong to do, or this would be right. But there's no moral reason, really. It's more of a, well, this is just the way it is.
Right. More of a pragmatic or a practical reason.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to one person who's a diagnosed psychopath, and she said something about, like, morality. She said, well, if you determine that it's a cost-benefit analysis to apply to, is it good or bad if a person sleeps around? Well, you can get venereal diseases, you can get pregnant, maybe it's not the right thing to do. But it's not that it's not the right thing, it's just not the most expedient thing to do.
Right.
So therefore, you do have people that are psychopathic, but they can be very, follow the 10 Commandments. But they won't feel guilty if they break one.
Right.
I think what's happened in our society today is we've got a breakdown of those traditional anchors that would actually keep some people from going all the way. We also glorify the psychopath. I was listening to, I won't name names, but he's a famous director, and he was talking about like Wall Street. It used to be, this kind of thing where, people went in there, of course they were probably psychopathic, highly driven, but there was a sense of ethics that permeated like in the 70s. But now it's more like just, it's that whole idea of, if you're in my way, I will eat you. I mean, I will make money no matter what. And we glorify that. In the media, we have all kinds of shows that, lifestyles of whatever, where we're showing people with giant, mansions and everything. And it's kind of like, oh, we must worship this. Yeah. So we become very consumeristic, and consumerism fits right in with psychopathy. If you're a marketer, if you're a businessman, or if you're a politician, or we have soundbite news now. We don't have news. Network news is not news. It's sound bites.
Right.
And that fits really well.
And drama.
Yeah. And so
it's pure theater half of the time.
It's entertainment. I mean,
yes.
And the thing is, that a psychopath, that's perfect for them. They go in there.
Well, you've got two of the factors that I think are responsible for this. Any others that you're thinking of?
Well, when it comes to psychopathy, I think that that's something that the society has now basically turned around and said, hey, we like this. And then they act surprised when people are that way. And with the narcissism, though, I've watched enough, my daughters turn on children's TV nowadays. And it's like one long commercial for this kind of shallow, materialistic attitude on life. And I think we have a lot of, they may not be genetically predisposed to narcissism, but we have a lot of narcissistic wannabes in our society. I think, and what's funny about them is they don't have that kind of, they're almost like, if you call like a psychopath or a narcissist maybe a wolf in sheep's clothing, well, the thing that they've done is they've convinced the sheep that they're wolves too, if they buy these products or elect these people or do these things.
Right.
And, so we got a lot of people that really are sheep, but they think they're wolves. They think they're this really individual type person, when in reality, they're just being led by the nose. In this kind of, I've heard about this, from many, many, many people in education. A lot of students now come to school wearing designer clothes with the designer iPhone, and it's almost like a teacher's interrupting them when they say, hey, it's class time. Because, they've been raised on this whole attitude that there is no real work when you go to school. It's the place where you show off your new clothes, your new purse, your new iPhone. But then again, they're not the narcissists that make it up in politics. They're the ones, the politician or the businessman is making money off of.
Yeah. Perhaps you can say just a few closing words for our audience members about just what it is you hope that they will do to discover your work and your thoughts on this topic. I know you have your own website. You've got your books that are available on Amazon. Anything else? Do you have a blog or anything like that?
Well, website, blog, it's, that's kind of the same thing. So just come to michaelcross.net. In fact, I was going to put up something about not narcissism, but the war on the individual. They'll probably go up in the next couple days. I usually put something up every week and a half or 2 weeks. And the thing I would encourage people to do is when you tune in to anything going on in politics, don't think that the people are acting insane when they do certain things or they don't do certain things. Because if you understand psychopathy, and it explains much of what we see in politics today. It explains why a politician can get up and lie to people, almost to that state of gaslighting the public.
Yes, even when the truth would do just fine.
Yeah. Even when the truth would do just fine, it's almost like this art they have of being able to lie and use this whole spin doctor thing.
Yeah. I have two articles about that, actually, that make sense of what appears to be nonsense. I actually, a while back, after working with a high volume of psychopaths in the prison system, I came to some conclusions based on evidence that I was gathering about the rationality of that kind of inveterate lying that seems so senseless. There's actually purpose to it, so I've actually written some articles on it.
Oh, that'd be interesting. Send me the link. I'd like to see those. I just think it's amazing that people don't understand that every word that a national politician says, well, maybe the exception of Donald Trump, I have a few things to say about him, but, he seems not to care. He just gets up and just says it. But all the others, everything they do is carefully crafted, it's written, it goes on the teleprompter that they're reading from.
Because the game of manipulation never stops.
Yeah, I mean, if you know anything about Frank Luntz, the really famous
pollster,
consultant, his job is to tell you what words and phrases will resonate with the people.
Yeah.
And, all the politicians are using these kinds of people now. And so nothing they say is genuine. They're saying it so they can get the message out. And if you understand psychopathy, if you really understand it, look and see how Democrats, Republicans, leadership see what they say, what they do, and then understand, there might be something to it if you actually learn about how psychopaths think.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty simple. If I'm going to have the power, I've got to win. And so if I don't do all these manipulations, I might not win. And winning, of course, in the words of Lombardi, is everything, especially to these kinds of character-disturbed folks. Well, Michael, I can't thank you enough for coming on the program today. It was interesting, very interesting discussion. I remember fondly our first visit. I hope I can guest again on your program sometime. And I'd be glad to have you back sometime on this program. I hope folks visit your site and avail themselves of your work. And I hope we get a chance to visit again real soon.
Okay, excellent. It's been really interesting talking with you there. And do send me those articles. I'd like to read them.
I will do it.
Okay.
Take care, Michael. Appreciate it.
Hey, you too. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Well, there's our interview with Michael Cross. I'm sorry that there's barely going to be time for perhaps one question or comment from the listenership. If you have a comment, you want to make it at 718-717-8296. I'm happy to take your call. We have just a few minutes left of the program, but an interesting conversation. It sounds like Michael's got some interesting fiction there on a psychopathic character, and it sounds also like the character that he has fashioned is far more true to the psychopathic MO than some of the TV characters like Dexter that there have been recently that have tried to basically inform the public through fiction what these characters are like. So visit Mike's website and check out his books and tune into his program here on UCY TV. And maybe we can have him again on the program some point in the future. Maybe also you might hear me guesting on his program again sometime in the future. Like I said, it was on Michael's program when I guested the first time that one thing led to another, and I ended up with my own program here on UCY.TV. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity. And check out some of my articles on manipulative-people.com and also on the Counseling with 2 L's resource.com website on psychopathy. There is the series Psychopathy 101. There's the series about what psychopathy is really all about, what psychopaths are really like. There's a particularly good series on on malignant narcissism being at the core of psychopathy. This is an interesting insight that I have had that explains the reason that these folks without empathy feel entitled to prey upon others, so. Check out I think there's at least 10 or 12 articles on the manipulative-people.com website and also on the counselingresource.com website. And, of course, there's plenty of information in my book, In Sheep's Clothing. The covert aggressive personalities that I talk about in that book are what we these days have called almost a psychopath. In their manipulative skill. And then also my book, Character Disturbance, The Phenomenon of Our Age, where you get the whole gamut of character disturbance, and where I explain that even though psychopathy itself is relatively rare, unfortunately we live in an age where there are all kinds of impaired characters, many of whom have traits like psychopaths on the spectrum of character disturbance, and this is a problem that has grown by leaps and bounds in our culture of narcissism, permissiveness, moral relativism, and even as Michael and I were talking about earlier, a culture that glorifies or even rewards various types of character disturbance. So that pretty much wraps it up for today. Thanks for tuning in. I'll be with you again next week on another edition of Character Matters. It will again be a live program. We'll be able to take your calls. No interview next time. It'll just be a live program, and I'll be able to take your calls. So tune in again next week for another edition of Character Matters. I'm Dr. George Simon. Thanks for tuning in.
Truth on the Tracks you can catch every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on UCY